Pam Bondi, a seasoned attorney known for her sharp legal acumen, stepped into the courtroom with an air of quiet determination. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a momentous revelation. The case at hand had already drawn significant public interest, but few could have predicted what was about to unfold. As she addressed the court, her tone was measured, yet firm. She methodically laid out a sequence of events that painted a troubling picture. Documents were projected onto the screen, each one reinforcing her argument with undeniable clarity. Every word was calculated, every pause intentional, allowing the weight of the evidence to sink in. Her legal team had spent weeks poring over records, cross-referencing statements, and compiling irrefutable proof. What they uncovered was a pattern, subtle, at first but unmistakable upon closer inspection. Transactions that shouldn't have occurred, communications that raised eyebrows, decisions that defied logic when viewed in the broader context of the law. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of papers or the clicking of a pen. The judge presiding over the case maintained a neutral expression, but there was no mistaking the shift in energy. The evidence was damning, and everyone in the room could feel it. One by one, Bondi presented witnesses who corroborated the findings. Legal experts weighed in, providing insight into how these irregularities had managed to go unnoticed for so long. Some spoke hesitantly, clearly unnerved by the gravity of the situation, while others delivered their testimonies with unwavering conviction. There was a moment when the tension peaked, when Bondi paused, allowing the weight of her argument to settle over the courtroom. She then produced a final piece of evidence, one that left no room for doubt. A financial record, an intercepted message, a sworn affidavit. Whatever it was the missing puzzle piece that tied everything together. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense scrambled to object, but the damage had been done. A murmur spread among those present, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and, for some, the grim realization that what they had suspected all along was finally being confirmed. Bondi stood, unwavering, her gaze steady. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for integrity, for accountability, for the fundamental principle that no one, regardless of their position, was above the law. The courtroom, once buzzing with murmurs of speculation, had fallen into a tense silence. The weight of what had just been revealed pressed down on everyone present. Legal professionals shifted in their seats, journalists scribbled frantically, and the gallery sat frozen, barely daring to breathe. The evidence was damning, the implications severe. There was no room for misinterpretation. The law demanded action, and it was about to be delivered with unwavering force. A slow, deliberate movement from the prosecution's table signaled the next step. A motion was filed, crisp and clear, calling for immediate consequences. The request was not made lightly. Such an action was unprecedented in its swiftness, but the gravity of the situation left no alternative. A hushed discussion broke out among the defense, their expressions betraying the panic they were trying to suppress. There was no escape from what had just been exposed, no legal loophole to shield against the inevitable. The presiding judge, maintaining an air of impartiality, reviewed the motion carefully. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the next words to be spoken. It was a moment charged with expectation, the kind that only arises when justice is on the precipice of being served in real time. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the decision was made. The order was given. A murmur spread like wildfire through the room, disbelief mixing with an undeniable sense of resolution. Eyes darted between the legal teams, searching for some sign of resistance, but there was none. The evidence had spoken louder than any argument could, and the law was moving swiftly, as it was meant to. A sudden shift in the atmosphere signaled that the wheels were fully in motion. A presence entered the courtroom, authoritative and unwavering. The sound of measured footsteps echoed through the chamber, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded only moments earlier. The weight of the situation became tangible. Every detail of the moment was etched into the minds of those witnessing it. The crisp uniforms, the unshakable demeanor of those carrying out the order, the stunned expressions on the faces of those who had once seemed untouchable. There was no dramatic outburst, no last-minute plea for reconsideration, only the quiet acceptance of an outcome that had become undeniable. The execution of justice was neither rushed nor delayed. It was carried out with the kind of precision that left no room for doubt, no space for second-guessing. The courtroom, once filled with uncertainty, now bore witness to the stark reality that accountability was not just a principle, but a practice. The message was clear. No one stood above the law, and when the truth emerged, it carried with it the full weight of consequence. The air in the courtroom felt different now, heavier, charged with an undeniable shift in power. What had started as a standard legal proceeding had transformed into something far greater, a reckoning. The weight of the truth, meticulously laid bare by the prosecution, had left an irreversible impact. There were no lingering questions, no room for interpretation. The evidence was absolute, and the wheels of justice had begun to turn with unwavering certainty. A hush settled over the gallery, an expectant silence that only deepened as the reality of what was happening took hold. The prosecution had done its job, methodically dismantling every falsehood, every excuse, every shield that had once protected the wrongdoing. Now, there was nothing left to hide behind. The inevitable was unfolding before everyone's eyes, and no one dared to look away. Movement in the courtroom was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A quiet exchange between officials, a nod of confirmation, the shifting of weight from one foot to the other as anticipation thickened the air. Then came the first unmistakable sign that the moment had arrived. A door near the back of the room opened, and in walked the agents of the law. Their presence an unspoken declaration that the proceedings had reached their final, irreversible conclusion. They moved with a quiet efficiency, unbothered by the eyes now fixed upon them. Their steps were measured, precise, as they approached with an air of professionalism that left no room for argument or resistance. Gasps rippled through the spectators, some leaning forward as if they couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. A few exchanged hushed whispers while others remained still, their hands clasped tightly in front of them. Even the most seasoned members of the legal profession sat rigidly in their seats, aware that this was not a scene often played out in a courtroom of this stature. It was a stark contrast to the moments before, where there had once been a sense of invincibility, of control. There was now only a silent acknowledgement of an unchangeable fate. The authority in the room had shifted, no longer resting with the one who had once held power, but instead with those who had been entrusted to uphold the law. A stillness settled in as the necessary steps were taken. The click of metal rang out in the hushed space, a sound so definitive that it seemed to mark the end of something far greater than just this trial. It was a sound that spoke of finality, of consequences that could no longer be escaped. It cut through the weight of the moment, leaving no question about what was happening. For a brief second, there was no movement at all. It was as if the entire courtroom had frozen in time, suspended in the reality of what had just transpired. The authority figures remained steady, their expressions unreadable, their focus solely on the duty they had come to fulfill. Then, with that same quiet efficiency, they turned, guiding their charge toward the exit. The steps taken now were different from those before. There was no confidence, no air of superiority, only the reluctant movements of someone who had lost the battle they had once believed they would win. As the procession moved toward the door, reactions varied across the room. Some faces remained impassive, their gazes fixed on the unfolding moment with the detachment of those who had seen justice work its course before. Others bore expressions of shock as though they had expected, even hoped for a different outcome. And then there were those who sat with a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from malice, but from the understanding that fairness had prevailed, that the system had done what it was meant to do. The steps continued, slow but steady, until the threshold of the doorway was reached. A final pause. A last glance around the room, perhaps searching for something, sympathy, disbelief, even a way out. But none came. The door swung open once more, and just like that, the moment was over. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds after. No one spoke, as if waiting for confirmation that what had just happened was real. Papers sat untouched on desks, pens motionless in hands that had previously been scribbling every detail. Even the reporters, normally quick to rush out with their notes, remained seated, absorbing the gravity of what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the courtroom began to stir. Conversations in hushed tones, the gathering of belongings, the rustling of fabric as people shifted in their seats. Yet, even as the motions of daily life resumed, there was an unshakable awareness that something monumental had just occurred, something that would not be forgotten anytime soon. The officials who had carried out their duty remained professional, neither celebrating nor displaying any emotion beyond the certainty of their task. They had seen this before and they would see it again. But for those in the room who had never witnessed such swift and decisive justice, the moment would be etched into their memories, a reminder that accountability was not just a distant ideal, but a tangible reality. And just like that, the courtroom doors slowly closed, sealing the end of a chapter that had unraveled in front of so many watchful eyes. The weight of what had just transpired lingered in the air long after the doors closed. Even as people began to shift in their seats, gathering their belongings and whispering in hushed voices, there was an undeniable feeling that something irreversible had taken place. The moment had been definitive, final, a rare instance where justice had unfolded with a swiftness that left no room for doubt or debate. Some remained seated, their expressions unreadable as they processed what they had just witnessed. Others exchanged looks, some filled with shock, others with quiet approval. No matter their personal opinions, all had seen the same thing: the law, in its most unyielding form, asserting itself in a way that could not be ignored. For those in the legal profession, it was a reminder of the very principles upon which the system was built. Laws were not mere guidelines, bent and twisted to serve the powerful. They were a foundation upon which society stood. This moment reinforced that belief, proving that even the most well-protected individuals were not immune to consequence. In the gallery, some sat in stunned silence, still gripping the edges of their seats as if expecting something more. A few journalists had already begun scribbling furiously, knowing that this was a story that would dominate headlines for days to come. The weight of accountability, once dismissed as an idealistic notion, had manifested itself in real time, leaving no room for ambiguity. The attorneys on both sides remained stoic, though there was an unmistakable contrast between them. On one side, a quiet confidence, the satisfaction of a battle fought with precision and integrity. On the other, an air of resignation, an understanding that no further arguments or appeals could change what had just happened. The case had been built on truth, and truth had prevailed. Outside the courtroom, the world waited. Reporters stood poised with cameras and microphones, ready to capture every reaction, every statement, every fleeting expression that might offer deeper insight into the events that had just unfolded. They knew that this moment would be analyzed, debated, and dissected across networks, in newspapers, and across social media. The images of what had transpired in that room would be replayed countless times, a visual testament to the power of justice in action. For those who had long suspected wrongdoing, it was a vindication. The voices that had been dismissed, the concerns that had been ignored were now validated. This was not just about one case or one individual. It was about the integrity of the system itself. If this could happen here, it could happen anywhere. And, yet amid all the reactions, there was a deeper realization settling in. Justice in its purest form was not about spectacle or retribution. It was about balance, about restoring faith in a system that too often seemed to serve only those with the means to manipulate it. This moment, however brief in the grand scope of history, stood as a reminder that accountability was not just an abstract concept. It was real, tangible, and, when necessary, swift. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the impact of what had taken place would not fade so easily. Some walked away in silence, others in deep discussion, and a few with the quiet certainty that they had just witnessed something that would be remembered for years to come. The law had spoken, and for once it had done so with undeniable clarity.